there was a 0% chance that some random person with a rifle was able to scale a roof.
Today, we bring you a special, unbridled edition of Real Science Radio on the murder of Corey Comparator and the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Some questions we will address on this show are, was there a conspiracy? And if so, to what extent? Was this truly a miracle of God that spared Trump? And what are the underlying causes of this tragic event? So I'd like to start this show, Doug, by getting your initial reactions.
Well, tragic. You said tragic. Corey Comparator was killed, and David Dutch and James Copenhaver they were seriously wounded, seriously. I've said a prayer over all of them and their families, and we encourage everyone in the audience to pray for the survivors and pray for their families. And you also said conspiracy. There's been a conspiracy in the media, in the mainstream media, and in the Obama deep state to get Donald J. Trump shot at since he announced he was running in this election cycle. And they have sympathizers. There's sympathizers between the media and the Obama deep state that I'm convinced were operational in this tragedy, whether by omission or by active conspiracy. And I lean more toward omission. A lot of this we're going to find out later, Fred, because there's a lot we don't know. And some people say we may never know. I read that, but we might not know till Judgment Day, Fred, but we will know.
Yeah, we will know for sure someday. So,
yeah.
Well, Doug, that's an interesting take. So let's go ahead and dive right into the question of conspiracy. First of all, on conspiracy theories, I really don't want to give any lip service to this whole idea that Trump staged this for a photo op.
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to be as ridiculous and ludicrous as it comes.
Yeah.
Many on the right, on the other hand, they're claiming it's an inside job. So I want to play a clip by Candace Owens, and I like her. We agree on a lot of stuff. She's out there and she's vocal and she's brave and, takes on difficult topics. But on this particular issue, I'm convinced she's wrong. She's convinced she's right. So let's play this clip.
You're telling me this guy was able to walk up with a rifle in his hand and scale a roof, and you don't think the Secret Service, and let me tell you, they get there days before. Let me tell you how a security apparatus is supposed to run. Days before, they get in and they look at every possible angle in which somebody could hurt the president, okay? And I'm not even talking about once you get to the Secret Service. I'm talking about if you just have security in general. Before you speak, they will go, okay, this is the stage. Okay, let me tell you, that right there is a problem. They'll mark that as a spot. That right there is a problem. We need to know who this person is. They'll knock on doors, okay? They got to figure out every possible angle that any individual could potentially get on a roof, because you know what? This has happened in the past. People have been shot from roofs. People have been shot from windows. There was a 0% chance that some random person with a rifle was able to scale a roof.
Doug, she says there's 0% chance that this isn't an inside job. That's a bridge too far. I'm on the opposite side of that, and I'm going to make a case here for our audience and see what they think. So,
okay.
The Secret Service, they were assigned that building that the shooter was on. They assigned it to local law enforcement, the Butler police and their SWAT team.
Yep.
And nobody appears to be disputing this because, the Secret Service claims that they did that. The Butler police they don't deny it. They do say that the Secret Service is ultimately to blame, which they are, but they don't deny that they were assigned protection of that building. Right. So that makes it pretty unlikely that the Secret Service is in on this inside job conspiracy. It pretty much eliminates them. So this means that the mole or inside man that Candace Owens is referring to, it has to be one or more officers on the Butler police force. And so I just look at this like as an engineer, just statistically. Will I actually bet on this being true? And I'm going to tell you there's no way. So as an example, let's say half of the Butler police force is anti-Trump. That seems unlikely in a rural area like that, but we'll give them half.
All right.
So out of those that are anti-Trump, what percentage of them are willing to risk an assassination attempt and do a plot like this And I'm going to be real generous and say that the odds are 1 in 100. Maybe 1 in 100 of those, Trump-hating cops want to devise a scheme to kill Trump.
Okay, that's very generous, 1 in 100. But okay, let's do the math.
Yeah, exactly. So if you do the math, that's 1/2 times 1 over 100, which is 1 in 200. If you get another officer involved, which it seems like you really would need more than just one. So if you do get another one involved, the odds go to 1 in 20,000 because this stuff just grows exponentially. Now, these guys had to somehow be in contact with the shooter, right? There has to be some kind of communication to set this whole thing up. So, we'll grant without adding anything to the odds that they had some deep state connections to make contact and to talk with this guy and to set this whole thing up. And somehow, by the way, they pick a guy, Doug, that was kicked off his rifle team in high school.
Well, that
doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Although,
but we're going to grant all of this.
Fred, it's a government bureaucracy, so that's probably that probably has better odds than anything that they would pick the wrong guy. But anyway.
Yeah. So now any communications these corrupt cops allegedly by, I'm going to say Candace Owens is implying that, these cops have to be making some kind of communication with this guy. Are those communications truly not going to be revealed? So right now, the FBI apparently has cracked his phone. And I know that's very difficult. We've heard about how secure these phones are, and they really are. And it takes a lot to break these things. So the latest I've heard is they've cracked into this phone. I have a friend who has worked for the North Glen Police Department, and one of his jobs is forensic analysis. He had expertise in software, and he would do this kind of work for them. So you'd have to have a guy at the FBI that's also in on it, because he's going to be the first one that sees a lot of the messages off this guy's phone. So you've got that guy, then you have to have an FBI guy involved, right? At least one. So when you do the odds of that and just say 1 in 100 agent is willing to go along with this whole thing, your odds are now 1 in 20 million. And so again, I really like Candace Owens, but if you think through this, to me, it's just not reasonable to make the case that this was an inside job. The conspiracies are very difficult to do. Tucker Carlson even came out and said that he thinks it's reasonable to think this is an inside job. And I'm just not there on that whole narrative. And I would ask, people like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and I know many of our friends who listen to the show, we've got dear friends who likely believe that this was an inside job. My question would be, can you provide a narrative, a working hypothesis of how this could happen?
Yeah, well,
I just went through a really unrealistic way this could possibly happen, and the odds were 1 in 20 million that they could pull it off without being caught.
So yeah, and you didn't mention, Fred, that you would have to make sure that the FBI agent you had was the guy who cracked the phone and was the first guy to see it. So 1 in 20 million is pretty generous. And I think there are more than... I think there are fewer people than 20 million involved. So it really mathematically mathematically it's absurd that there was an actual plot to shoot the president. But can I give you a plausible explanation of how it might have occurred?
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. And anyway, I heard Candace Owens say that we know the policy. They go in and they check everything, and that every angle and this and that and that. And Fred, anyone who's worked at a job, especially if you've ever worked for a large company or a big bureaucracy, you know that there's policy and procedure, and then there's what might happen on any given day. What might happen on any given day. And so far, based on what I have seen and read, it seems to me plausible that the Secret Service thought the local police had this building secured. The local police thought the Secret Service had the building secured, but for whatever reason, the agents were in the building, not on the building. And Fred, it even looks to me with the sniper like he might have seen a guy with a gun on the roof, but he might have thought it was a good guy. He might have thought it was a friendly. Because the video I saw, the sniper looks shocked for a second, and then he bears down and takes the guy out. That's just what it looked like to me. We'll probably hear from that guy eventually.
Yeah, we will. I think eventually. So, Doug, And Doug, we didn't have a lot of time to prep for this show. I mean, this is a breaking news event. I haven't had a lot of time to talk to you about this, but I agree with you 100% because I had come up with my own scenario that I wanted to present that I think is plausible and more reasonable.
Okay.
And one of those was your point. So, and I had some bullet points here that I jotted down. So the Secret Service was underutilized. They had insufficient resources and certainly not the same resources granted a sitting president. One of the news agencies, it might have been the BBC, interviewed somebody who said he noticed how when Trump was president, there were so many, they could see guys on every building, when he was at an airport. He said he noticed when he got there, he didn't see guys on every building. He only saw them on a couple, and he thought that was unusual and was concerned about that. So as far as conspiracy goes, I do think the Secret Service is lying when they deny that they were requested for additional security by Trump's team. I think they were, and that they denied it, and now they're saying that's patently false. Well, I believe Dan Bongino on that when he says he has very reliable sources that say that they were turned down. So the Secret Service was underutilized, and they were hence relying on a local police force to secure one of those buildings that they had noticed. They had pointed out early on in their site assessment that was a risk. So hey, Butler Police, you get that one. This explains in the bullet points I have here, Doug, what you just said, that the Secret Service sniper probably thought that he might be shooting a friendly, so he paused momentarily. Then you see him look up, which I think pretty much correlates with the shots being fired, and then he immediately drops down and takes the guy out.
Yeah.
As they say on the news, they neutralized the target, and as one of the BBC guy who got interviewed blew his head off. So I want to relate quickly a story that I was told by my cousin who was in the Secret Service, and he guarded Reagan. And he guarded the Queen of England and other people, but he also guarded Reagan. He was supposed to be guarding Reagan, by the way, the day he was shot at. He was shot, and I believe the agent's name was McCarthy, but my cousin had switched shifts with him. Anyways, the story I wanted to tell was Ford was driving through Dallas, of all places. And by the way, Ford had 2 different assassination attempts within 17 days when he was president.
Yeah.
He's driving through Dallas, and the Secret Service, they have their binoculars, they're checking everything out in the motorcade route, and they notice an object protruding from a window in one of the high-rises, and they had their snipers trained on that window, and they were given orders that if they can't get a better vantage point to take out the occupants in that room. I mean, they would have just obliterated that side of the building, basically, with gunfire. Within a block, they noticed they got a better angle, and it was an old man holding the window open with like a broomstick or some kind of stick object, and his wife is sitting behind him on the couch. I was relayed this from a Secret Service agent. You don't hear these kind of stories. So, thank goodness that they had restraint right to the end. Otherwise, you'd have 2 innocent people dead. So now with the woke society that we have, and with cops, getting sued if they kill somebody, and, they're always under threat that if you kill somebody in this day and age, you could go to jail. So this Secret Service agent was likely having a split second, am I shooting a friendly here?
Yeah.
And that to me, that helps explain. People ask, well, why didn't he shoot him right away? Why was he delaying? He must be in on it. Oh, give me a break. I'm sorry, but there's no way.
Right.
Total common sense says it exactly as you explained it. I'm glad that you kind of had the same observation that I did.
Well, it's just a possibility. And the thing that the Secret Service agent wasn't in on was what we all know now. He was only in on what he knew right then. And that he might have thought that was a friendly, and that was the hesitation. Now, Fred, what I haven't heard a reasonable explanation for, and why heads should roll, many heads should roll, is that apparently the police saw this guy, perhaps even took a picture of him 20 minutes before. People yelled, "There's a guy with a gun," for well over 1 minute. I watched a video, well over 1 minute. He's got a gun. He's got a gun. He's on the roof. That, let me just say this. What was the date of that? Was Saturday, July, what was that? Saturday, July 13th is the day in the redneck community, is a date that will live in infamy. It's the date that all of the rednecks, and by the way, I include myself in that group. It's the day all of the rednecks failed to stand up and be rednecks. How come there wasn't one redneck in that crowd with a gun? And when you start seeing a guy with a rifle crawling up, anyway, you could at least threaten the guy. Anyway.
Yeah, there wouldn't have been probably nobody would have had guns because you couldn't have a gun through security. But this guy was apparently outside the security, outside of the main security zone. The other thing I have in my notes here is that there's a report that said that they planned to have a team on that roof, the local police, but it was too hot. And so they had a team that just stayed in the building. And see, to me, that's very plausible. It's this complacency.
Yeah.
It's like, is this something really going to happen? So you have a team in the building. And so if they're in the building and they're not sufficiently pacing outside, a guy could sneak up and climb up a ladder. Maybe, I don't know. We'll find out if that ladder was placed there beforehand or if it's always there. I suspect it was probably put there by the shooter. I don't know. But all of this is very plausible. Yeah. And like you said, they've spotted this, this whack job killer, this liberal who who was just, he was bent on killing Trump. And we do believe, it's very obvious that the media and all their hate at Trump, like you said, is just creates an environment where people like this come out of the woodwork.
Yes, I mean, do you remember, Fred? I mean, I'm sure you remember Tony Scalise being shot at the softball game, the Republican softball game, and you remember the Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh, where they found a maniac with a gun right outside his house.
Well, many of these, Doug, have been thwarted that we don't know about. They're either thwarted or the person went to an event like this and just didn't see the opportunity. You see snipers on roofs. You're going to be deterred by that. There's going to be all kinds of things that who knows how many of these we missed. But back when they didn't have as good a security for presidents, I referenced Ford earlier. He was, there was 2 assassination attempts on him within 17 days. And both of those were from political activists. One was a Charlie Manson follower.
Yeah, Squeaky Fromm.
Yeah, Squeaky Fromm, and the other one, I don't recall her name, but I do recall she was a tree hugger. She was upset about the redwoods. And maybe I've got both of those two mixed up, but I know they were both leftist, and that was their reasoning, was, their political activism. Well, back then it was a lot easier. Now it's not so easy. But when you create an environment, this is the kind of thing that can happen. So to my last bullet point, I think because of there's some chaos, there's the cops, they're not, I don't know if I don't want to say incompetent, but at the very least complacent and just making a clown show, as one person on the news referred to on that whole building security, a clown show. And this guy somehow gets lucky and finds a ladder, or if it's already there, he makes it up to the roof. And spends up to 30 minutes up there where people, I know there was 3 solid minutes where people were yelling, "We got a shooter on the roof."
Yeah,
so
that's the part that's hard for me to process. And then now you speak of leftists. Well, before I get to the leftists, back to negligence or incompetence. If the Secret Service and the local police, if everyone with a gun in their hand with a live round in it, if every one of them was not on a live radio net where they could all speak to one another and identify one another by call sign, that's negligence. It's impossible for me to believe, but it almost seems, Fred, like that's the only way this couldn't have happened, was that guy with the sniper who took him out was not able to verbally communicate with the guy on the roof. He should have been able to, and when he realized he couldn't, he would have immediately known this is a bad guy. He's not on the net. But apparently that didn't happen, or I don't know. Like you say, Fred, the confluence of just incompetence, inadequate resources, complacency, and some guy gets lucky. But then there's the leftists. So Fred, the director of the Secret Service, she has an explanation. She was asked, why was there no one on that roof? And her answer was, quote, that building in particular has a sloped roof at its highest point, and so, there's a safety factor that would be considered there that we wouldn't want to put someone up on a sloped roof. That's unquote. That's obvious quota hire. The head of the Secret Service. Her name is Jill Biden Cheadle. I'm sorry. It's Kimberly Jill Biden Cheadle. Those two names will forever be synonymous with one another. So that's what she said in response to the question. So it sounds to me like it's possible she did have some say in what was happening outside of her area of operation. That's possible. Or she's just a moron and she doesn't know how to speak English clearly. You know, a roof cannot be sloped at its highest point. By definition, Fred, the roof's highest point is just its highest point. The slope, it would slope from there somewhere. So anyway, she obviously doesn't speak well. She's obviously a quota hire. She's one of these DEI hires. She may have went to the Kamala Harris School for Communications, and that's how she got her gig, because she's a big buddy of Jill Biden. Anyway, she should be fired immediately and possibly arrested and charged with something, depending on the investigation, something up to negligent homicide, Fred.
Yeah, I mean, again, we haven't had time to really vet this, everything we're going to say on this show, but Doug, the roof that the Secret Service agents were on, the snipers, that seems sloped. That was sloped at an angle. That would be just as difficult a roof to be on. I don't understand how the other roof wouldn't have been as safe for Secret Service agents. That just seems so baloney.
Yeah. It sounds like a bureaucrat trying to explain something she doesn't really even understand yet, because she's been caught in at least a position of incompetence.
Yeah, and you and I talked about this off air, but if you want to talk conspiracy, there could be this underlying, we do know that there is this atmosphere promoted by the media over the last who knows how many years of this vitriol and hate towards Trump, comparing him to Hitler and things like that. They created an environment to have something like this happen, and they could have been either intentionally or not, or just subconsciously relaxing security on Trump. And, and maybe subconsciously hoping, be welcome for something like this to happen. They didn't have any Secret Service for Robert Kennedy Jr. His uncle and his dad were assassinated.
Right.
And they don't have any security for him. Well, he takes votes away from Biden. And so there could be this underlying thought process that I'm not saying is like they all get together and say, hey, we're going to not protect Trump and Kennedy that well because, we want Biden to win. I don't think that's going on. But that verse where we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but the principalities and wickedness that we don't see, but it's there. It exists. We know. We believe the Bible. We know it's true.
Fred, I'm not a superstitious person, and I don't believe in magic. I believe there are spiritual forces that we don't fully comprehend, that have influence on us that we may not even often perceive. And especially someone who doesn't know God, they're especially vulnerable to negative, evil, spiritual influence, and I mean generally from other people. But there's spiritual influences that we don't fully understand, that's for sure.
Well, that gets to the next question, Doug, and that is whether or not this was a miracle that saved Trump from this assassination attempt. So I'd like to play a clip from Senator Tim Scott. He's from South Carolina, and he was a candidate to be vice president. He probably was, he was in the top 4 or 5. He wasn't selected. But here's what he had to say at the convention here this last Monday night.
If you didn't believe in miracles before Saturday, you better be believing right now. Because on Saturday, the devil came to Pennsylvania holding a rifle, but an American lion got back up on his feet and he roared. Oh yeah, he roared.
Okay, Doug, here's my thoughts on this. Was it a miracle? Bob Enyart, Pastor Enyart, had a really great Bible study on miracles in the Bible, and I encourage people to go get that. It's made me more skeptical of miracles, modern day miracles. I don't completely rule them out, that God he certainly could do anything he wants. He can actively engage with us in any way he desires. But Bob's point is in that video is that miracles foster unbelief. And so when God uses a miracle, there's reasons why he doesn't. And again, I encourage people to get that Bible study. So my position is maybe, maybe not. I don't think it likely was. But you've got Christians out there like Tim Scott. They believe it was a miracle. I've seen people posting Ephesians 6:11, put on the whole armor of God. Why are they putting that there? Because Trump was shot at 6:11. At 6 p.m., 6 o'clock, 11 minutes.
Okay.
And then people quote Psalm 91:11 that, that there's angels protecting us. Mm-hmm. So you've got this. And so I think about that in context of also other verses that say time and chance happen to us all. God does allow things to happen by chance. I know we're upsetting all our Calvinist friends out there. But God doesn't always, get involved into that detail. He can, and he's aware of everything that's happening, but was this a miracle? And one other thought I had is, remember Israel, there was a point where they were so wicked that God refused to listen to their prayers, because I know people were praying for Trump, and that's great. We should be praying for our leaders. But and also in the context that Trump and his new selection VP, this Vance from Ohio, this Senator Vance, they both support the abortion pill. I heard Vance say that on Meet the Press. He was very explicit. Yeah, I do support the abortion pill. Yeah. So, in Real Science Radio, we know that from science shows us that baby in the womb is fully human. You can't get around the science. It's a person, no disputing it. And so was Trump saved by an angel because he's he's a really solid Christian or a man of God and righteous? That Psalm 91 verse applies to people who are righteous. Mm-hmm. If you read the context. Yes. Wow. I struggle with that one. I don't think it was a miracle. That's just me. Fred, what about you, Doug?
Well, I've heard other Christians say that it doesn't matter if Trump is righteous or not. If he's God's chosen vessel, then perhaps God has chosen somehow to protect him. Fred, I'm certain it wasn't a miracle, because when God does miracles, the ear is fully restored, and the killed and the wounded are healed, or they rise from the dead. And so, all references to Psalms and Ephesians aside, I have numerous scriptures that clearly explain, based on what I just said, what an actual miracle is from the Bible. And so I think to even entertain the idea of a miracle or divine intervention, it just shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how God is operating in the world today. And Fred, more than that, it helps Donald Trump on his way straight to hell. It helps him on his way straight to hell. Tim Scott, he's a phony baloney Christian, and that was a profane offering that he made to God, by the way. Did you notice the name that was not named was Jesus Christ? Mm-hmm. Even though he mentioned salvation, he didn't associate that with the name of Jesus Christ, and so that was a profane offering. I would call it a stench in the nose of God. And I have, since Donald Trump announced in 2015, I have always and consistently asserted, and people can go back, there's audio tape of me on the air going back, I've always stated that Donald Trump is a relatively dim-witted, vulgar celebrity he's been a leading figure in profaning American civilization for well over 40 years. He admits he's never humbled himself before Jesus Christ, and he's never said he was sorry for any of it. We know he's willing to negotiate with the pro-aborts, not only over the abortion pill, but over which babies to cut in half and where exactly to cut them. He's willing to negotiate. And we know he's a friend of the sodomites. And the left, they only hate him because, Fred, they're so godless that he reminds them of God, even though he's just giving God lip service. That drives them crazy. And Fred, Donald
Yep.
Trump was a half an inch from going straight to hell last Saturday. Half an inch from hell. And we should all pray that this is a wake-up call for him spiritually, as I have prayed already. Because had he been killed, Fred, had Donald Trump been killed, he would right now be forever what he has become, a useful political tool of the so-called religious right who helped him go to hell. That's who he would be forever. But anyway, and I hope he repents, Fred, but I worry that he's going to Trump is going to wrap himself in the mistaken assumption of God's divine protection, and he'll become even more arrogant, he'll become even more hellbound than he ever was before, and I pray that doesn't happen.
Yeah. No, that's interesting, Doug. Yeah, because how he reacts to this near-death experience, basically, to some, he was almost killed. People react different ways. It'll be interesting. I agree with you. Let's pray for him that it's the correct response. I thought about death is, in a way, death actually, to me, and see what you think, Doug, I find death is a blessing. And the reason why this is why I say this, kind of startling at first to hear this, but if God didn't provide a way to pay for our penalties, and the consequence of our sin is death, is physical death. If he didn't provide that, then we could never be with him. He could never pay that price himself. So in that regard, death is a blessing. And then maybe in another regard, it's maybe God's last-ditch effort to reach somebody who doesn't believe in him. Maybe they're on a deathbed or this and that. His last-ditch effort. I don't know. I could be wrong about that, but it's just something that popped into my mind.
Yeah.
As we were considering all this. So hopefully Trump takes the course that apparently George Wallace did when he had his life almost snuffed from him. Remember, he was a senator in Alabama, or I think he was a governor. And he had an assassination attempt that crippled him.
Yeah. And
he was pro-segregation. He was a racist. But it changed him. I mean, that by all accounts, it changed him, and he was no longer racist. He was more accommodating to people of all color. So, anyways, just an interesting thought. And Doug, so the final thing I wanted to talk about is what are the underlying causes? And to me, this kid who shot at Trump, and then just the whole environment that our country and our world is in, is just a godless society. We took God out of the public schools. Public schools should have never happened anyways. So 3 major documents in history. 2 of them promote public schools. Magna Carta and the Communist Manifesto. Which one doesn't mandate public schools? The Bible. Can you find public schools in the Bible anywhere? No, the Bible doesn't. But, you have Magna Carta, and then, they foisted the public schools in the United States, I don't know, in the mid-1800s. But when they took God out of the public schools, and that was it, so that's where our society's heading. This guy who shot Trump and killed and murdered that one man, and then gravely injured 2 other people. One person was apparently shot in the head, in the chest and the liver. One guy they don't talk about was a senator's, I think, son or nephew, and he got grazed in the neck. He has a graze right through his neck. So there's other people injured that we haven't even heard about. But this kid who went to this high school, he was taught millions of years in evolution, death, disease, suffering. He thinks he's an animal. He's evolved from an animal. We know he's on the left. I mean, they say he's a registered Republican, where you can be a Republican and be on the left. And who knows when he registered, if his parents registered him. His high school classmates said that even after masks were no longer mandated, he was still wearing his mask around a lot. But this is a kid that's been taught evolution in millions of years.
Yeah.
And so the underlying problem is, you can trace it right down to what our kids are being taught, the public schools. Get your kids out of the public schools, get them into a Christian education, ideally homeschooling, and we'll just have less of this. That's what no one's going to talk about those underlying problems except us young earth creationists, frankly, Doug.
Exactly. And I hope Donald Trump realizes that in promoting a culture in which killing someone is an option, which Donald Trump has done, he's actively promoted that, as far as I can tell, for his whole life. that if something is very inconvenient, very embarrassing, very difficult, like an unplanned pregnancy, killing someone is an option. Well, generations later, you end up with a 20-year-old he's your political opponent, and it's been inculcated into his mind that killing you is an option. That's where we are. It's very sad.
Yeah. Good point, Doug. Oh, and Doug, I did want to comment on Trump being shot, his reaction.
Oh, his reaction to actually being shot. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought it did show leadership. I'm going to give him that. And I did think it showed courage. In fact, I have a clip from, I believe his name is pronounced Cenk, and he's from the Young Turks. So people who follow politics, they'll know who this guy is. He's a progressive. He's one of those guys that's somewhat intellectually honest, Doug, for being a liberal. Some of these people, they seem to be just, they're below the truth, but there's part of them, they want to kind of do the right thing, but they don't have God in their lives. And so he's one of those liberals that I kind of respect a little bit, even though he drives me nuts, but sometimes he makes not arguments that ever would convince me against anything that's conservative, but he has some logical flow to some of his arguments. I have found him as intellectually honest. I wanted to play this clip of what he said about the Trump assassination attempt right after it happened. Let's roll it.
You see him there say, wait, to the Secret Service. Wait. Then it appears he says to the crowd, fight. He looks totally heroic. You got to be honest about it. You have to be objective about it. That's our job. Look, thank God he's alive. Shooting your political opponents is an act of submission, unilateral surrender, saying my ideas are too weak. I can't beat you politically. I've got to end you physically. That's a disaster. The shooter is, of course, disgusting, both morally and, of course, politically. He's done nothing but terrible damage. And it is clearly an assassination attempt. Those pictures and videos, now just from purely political perspective, are going to look terrific for him. I've called him a coward hundreds of times, but here he was not. He was brave, and that was an incredible moment when he put his arm up and said, fight. So Trump's okay. Assassination attempt. He's alive. It's a disaster in every other way.
So, Doug, I wanted to play that clip for a couple of reasons. First, as I mentioned, this guy does show some intellectual honesty. We know that God writes the laws on every man's heart, so man does know the difference between right and wrong. And it also speaks to all these people who have been calling Trump Hitler through the last several years, comparing him to Hitler. Yet if he was assassinated, people wouldn't be offering condolences to the family, reacting like Cenk was here.
Right.
You're just not going to have that same reaction. I heard a pundit mention this. I thought, well, that's a pretty good point. If Hitler was assassinated, you wouldn't be offering condolences to the family. So obviously the liberals, Doug, they know that this narrative's not true. He's not Hitler at all.
Yeah.
And since this has happened, even Biden said, I heard him on the radio coming home, listen to some speech he gave about how we got to, cut back on the rhetoric and the heat and all this stuff. He's giving lip service to this whole thing and saying he's thankful that Trump is okay and he's praying for his family. You don't do that for someone that you really think is like Hitler.
Yeah.
If he really was like Hitler, you'd want him dead. You want someone to take him out.
Right, because Hitler was, in the classic sense of the term, a threat to democracy, which is a term that they've used over and over and over. And when you have a kid, a generation of kids who've been raised to worship democracy as if it's, democracy over the Bible. If he's really a threat to democracy, then killing him is an option. It certainly certainly was in the mind of this maniac. And by the way, Fred, I seeing that video again. So you had mentioned earlier that perhaps the Trump team was denied adequate security. Maybe security wasn't up to snuff. Fred, is it sexist of me to say that the Secret Service should be made up exclusively of big, strong men? Is that sexist?
It's not at all, Doug. And, one of the shots that everybody's seen, if you go watch when they got him off the stage, this shorter Secret Service lady. And then you have another taller Secret Service guy put his hand over above her head to protect Trump's head as if his hand's going to stop a bullet. You know, my cousin who was in the Secret Service, he was 6'4". I'm pretty sure his friend McCarthy, I believe is his name, the Secret Service agent who took the bullet for Reagan.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he's 6'3". They're all tall.
Yeah.
The ones who guard tall guys. Reagan was tall. He had Secret Service around him that were tall. But now because they're letting women into the Secret Service, you know, because of just this whole way society's heading, it doesn't make sense to me. You know, if you're going to have women in the Secret Service, have them guard somebody shorter, like Jill Biden, you know. Don't put a short woman on Donald Trump. Donald Trump's a tall dude.
I think he's 6'2", so everyone around him should be 6'2" or bigger. And by the way, if anyone does think I'm sexist, I think everyone in the Secret Service should be bigger and stronger than me. Not just women. I want them bigger and stronger than me if they're in the Secret Service. Thank you very much.
And well qualified. My cousin was a police officer for the Dallas Police Force. So, you know, we need qualified people, not like you said earlier, Doug, a quota. How did you call it? A quota person, right? Someone you're checking a box with.
She's a DEI quota hire. Yeah, she's a quota hire, obviously.
Yeah, check a box.
Friend of Jill Biden.
Yeah, we shouldn't be checking a box for security, for the president, for the military, any of our things that are important for the safety of all of us, Doug. Yeah. And one other point I wanted to make with Cenk Uygur, the young Turk guy, it kind of plays to the point that most liberals don't want to go out and kill people. Most liberals are not diabolical.
Yeah.
And he's an example, and there's many of them. There are ones that are really diabolical. But there's the vast majority, or a large majority, aren't. And so you have to find a diabolical one to even start a conspiracy. And it just, you know, again, it adds to the point that a conspiracy, an inside man, all that kind of stuff is just highly unlikely.
Yeah, more than likely, government incompetence, woke policies, combined with complacency, and Fred, the idea of some politically motivated negligence of security is not outside the realm of possibility.
Not at all. Yeah. So
this
particular incident.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you look at this particular incident from the view of the trees, not the forest of trees, it all boils down primarily to government incompetence and complacency. And if you look at it from the forest point of view, then there's this underlying current where you have this lack of security for guys who aren't Democrats running for president against the guy you want to win. Biases occur in human nature. It's human nature. Biases occur. Incompetences occur.
Well, and sometimes the biases are, Fred, sometimes the biases are much more obvious because, as you mentioned earlier, Joe Biden and his administration have denied RFK Jr., one of the prime targets of a maniac shooter in the history of such a thing. They've denied him any Secret Service protection, which is shocking. And it sounds like that's been corrected. That's one good thing to come out of all this.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, Doug, thanks for getting together to do this special edition of Real Science Radio.
Well,
it's, it's a tragedy, and we, like you said, we're praying for the families.
Absolutely.
Of the fireman that was shot and killed, his family.
So everyone, just want to remind everyone, pray for the family of Corey Comparatore, the man who was murdered, and David Dutch and James Copenhaver, the seriously wounded. Pray for all their families. Pray for Donald Trump. Pray for Joe Biden. Pray for Jill Biden.
Yeah, 100% agree. In fact, I'd like to close by saying Dominic Inyart on Inyart Theology has a great roughly 20-minute video on a Christian response to the Trump assassination attempt. I encourage you to go watch that, and we'll link to that.
I'll check it out. Thanks, Fred.
So for Doug McBurney, I'm Fred Williams of Real Science Radio. Thank you very much for joining us for this special edition, and we'll see you next week when we get into more science news, including updates from the hydroplate theory, shocker there, and other really cool things that are happening in science news. May God bless you.